All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling emotional competence. How their emotions play into their learning.
Mm,
And I guess to start, maybe we could just define that for our listeners. What is emotional competence?
sure, yeah. The sources define it as a set of abilities. So it starts with awareness of emotion,
Mm.
being able to recognize your own feelings, understanding and using emotion-related vocabulary. Also understanding kind of what different facial expressions mean, the kinds of situations that trigger certain emotions.
Right.
And it includes recognizing those cultural rules about when and how you display emotion. And ultimately, being able to manage that emotional intensity appropriately.
Okay, so that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about knowing what emotions are, but it's also about being able to use them in a functional way.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, a lot of the early research, when people first started looking at emotional competence, they were really focused on social relationships.
That's right.
Things like making friends, resolving conflicts, and those kinds of interpersonal dynamics.
It makes sense. Emotions are so important in how we connect with other people.
Totally. But for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at a different piece of this. We're going to be exploring how emotional competence is linked to academic success
Hmm.
all throughout childhood. So we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of how emotions impact kids' learning.
Right. We're kind of looking at it from a developmental psychology perspective,
Mhm.
educational psychology, even teacher education.
Exactly. How these skills emerge, how they impact learning,
Yeah.
and how teachers can kind of foster these abilities.
Yeah, yeah. We have one main source today, a review article that brings together a lot of the research and theory in this area.
All right, a nice comprehensive overview for us.
Hmm.
So for our listeners, the mission today is really to come away with a solid understanding of which specific emotional competencies really matter when it comes to learning.
Right.
And even more broadly, how do emotions, teachers, the whole learning environment, how do they all interact?
Mhm.
That's really what we're going to be exploring. So to kick things off, uh, maybe we can just start with some of the big psychological theories
Hmm.
that have tried to explain this link between emotions and learning.
Yeah.
Like, where do we even begin to understand this connection?
Well, one place we could start is motivational theories. What those theories tell us is that emotion regulation, so how you manage your emotions, that contributes directly to how much effort you're going to put into academic tasks
Right.
and how persistent you're going to be when you encounter those challenges.
Okay, so that makes sense, right? If you're easily frustrated, you're going to give up. You're not going to get
Right.
very far.
Right.
So for our listeners out there, just think about how a child's ability to regulate their frustration, that's directly tied to their ability to keep trying in school, right?
Yeah.
To persevere academically.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a lot of research that backs this up. Studies showing that when children are curious, when they're engaged, and when they have these sort of positive feelings, even when they're challenged, they tend to do better.
Mm,
They perform better academically. And there's even evidence that suggests positive emotions can improve problem solving.
right.
Recall decision making. I mean, you think about those aha moments, they often come when you're feeling positive and open to those new ideas.
Yeah, totally. So those positive feelings create a more receptive state for learning. What about when we're feeling, you know, more challenging emotions, right?
Right.
Not every emotion in school is going to be a positive one.
Right. And that leads us to attentional control theory. Um, so this idea is that when a lot of your mental energy is tied up in managing emotions, if you're really, really trying to control your feelings, it can actually detract from your ability to think clearly
Yeah.
and to listen effectively. So, and imagine trying to focus on a teacher who's explaining some new concept
Hmm.
and you're really upset about something that happened earlier,
Yeah.
maybe at home or on the playground, it's just going to be that much harder.
It's like all your processing powers diverted, right? You can't focus because you're so caught up in that emotion.
Exactly. So, for our listeners, if you have a student who's just, having a really, really hard time managing their emotions, they're going to have less cognitive capacity
Hmm.
available to actually absorb that new information.
Right, right. Okay, and then another theory that I found really interesting was Izard's differential emotions theory. Now, he really focuses on the role of interest
Yeah.
and its impact on learning. So tell us a bit more about that. What does he mean by interest, and how does it connect to learning?
So yeah, by interest, he means, that genuine curiosity,
Mm.
wanting to know more about something. He posits that it's a powerful motivator
Yeah.
for creative thought and for selective attention.
Okay.
And more recently, his theory has kind of evolved to suggest that having good emotion knowledge, being aware of your emotions,
Hmm.
that allows you to kind of use the right emotions at the right time,
Yep.
particularly for tasks that require, deep focus.
Right. So
Yeah.
recognizing that you're feeling interested in something actually helps you kind of lean into it
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
and pay more attention.
That's fascinating. All right, so that gives us a bit of a glimpse into the psychology behind this whole emotion learning link.
Yeah.
But I think, educational theories also offer a really valuable perspective on this.
Right.
So what do those theories add to our understanding?
So educational researchers, they often draw on a lot of these social psychology ideas,
Mm-hmm.
especially those focusing on goals and motivation.
Right.
And one that comes to mind is Piqueron's control value theory of achievement emotions.
Okay.
And that theory suggests that how much control a student thinks they have over their learning and how much they value achieving success, that really is central to the kinds of emotions they're going to experience in school.
Okay, so if a student feels like they have no control over their success or failure, that's going to lead to a very different emotional experience
Exactly.
compared to a student who feels like, their effort makes a real difference, right? Right. And he talks about, certain emotions that are linked to the effort a student puts in. So, enjoyment, frustration, boredom,
Mm-hmm.
those are kind of related to, how much effort you're putting in.
Right.
And then other emotions, joy, hope, pride, also anxiety, hopelessness, shame, anger, those are related to success or failure.
Right, right. So it's a whole spectrum of emotions that come into play.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's really fascinating, right? To think about how all these different emotions are swirling around
Mm-hmm.
in a student's experience.
Mm-hmm.
And something that's really important for our listeners to grasp is this idea that a student's belief in their ability to control their learning, that's really important. That belief, that has a powerful emotional impact.
Yeah,
And if a student feels helpless, that's going to lead to a lot of negative emotion.
absolutely.
And that's going to make it even harder for them to learn. And so understanding that, I think, can really inform how, our listeners approach supporting their students and giving them feedback.
Right. Yeah. And another point to consider is, all the stuff with students' goals and their emotions,
Mm-hmm.
those aren't just internal.
Right.
They're very much shaped by the social and historical context,
Mm.
their upbringing, their culture, their past experiences.
Right. So it's not just about what's going on in the student's head. It's also about their environment, their background, their experiences.
Exactly. Similar to how, developmental psychologists look at socialization in families.
Right.
Kids learn about emotions from their parents.
Right. What's acceptable,
Yeah.
how to react to different feelings.
Right.
That all comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then another thing I want to touch on was emotional intelligence, or EI,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is related but a little bit different from emotion knowledge.
Right. Yeah.
So can you talk a bit about EI and how it might differ from just knowing about emotions?
Sure, yeah. So Mayer and Salvi defined EI as the ability to use your understanding of emotions, both in yourself and in others, to navigate social situations effectively.
Okay.
So, it's not just about recognizing a sad facial expression.
Yeah.
It's about understanding why someone might be feeling sad
Mm.
and then responding in an appropriate way.
Right, right. So it's like taking that knowledge and putting it into action.
Exactly. Yeah. So, for your listeners, the key difference is that emotional intelligence is really focused on the application
Mm-hmm.
of that emotional understanding, especially in social interactions.
Okay, okay. And does EI include emotion knowledge, or are they completely separate?
Well, there's definitely overlap, particularly in areas like appraisal and regulation.
Mm-hmm.
But EI, as it's often defined, it includes things like personality traits, your
Yeah.
own motivation levels, empathy, self-concept, assertiveness.
Oh.
So it's kind of a broader umbrella.
Okay, so it's kind of like emotion knowledge is one piece of that larger EI puzzle.
Right. And it's interesting, the different theories that look at this emotion cognition link, they place different emphasis on, being aware of emotions, understanding them, regulating them, managing them.
Right,
And some focus more on your own emotions, some focus more on others' emotions.
right, right. So there's all these different pieces that come into play.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the theory, the why behind this connection between emotions and learning. But now I think it would be really helpful to talk about, how these skills actually develop in kids.
Right.
So let's start with the little ones, the early childhood years.
Okay, yeah. So in early childhood, even before kids start formal schooling, we see kind of the very beginning of
Mm.
this development. And one of the really early signs of this connection is when toddlers start talking about their internal states,
Oh,
their feelings.
right.
And some researchers even think of that, being able to put words to their feelings. That's one of the earliest signs of that emotion cognition link.
Okay, so when a little 2-year-old says, I'm sad, that's actually a really big deal developmentally.
It is, yeah.
For our listeners, if you're working with young children, recognizing that early language about emotions,
Mm-hmm.
that's a window into their self-awareness
Yeah.
and their ability to kind of make sense of their inner world.
And it suggests, they're developing a sense of self, some moral understanding, the very
Mhm.
beginning of their ability to regulate their emotions. Even, 2-year-olds, very young. They can sort pictures of happy and sad faces,
Oh, yeah?
and they can distinguish between, more intense and less intense expressions.
That's amazing.
But a lot of the research in early childhood, it focuses on kids who are 3 and older.
Okay.
And at that point, they're starting to develop a better understanding of facial expressions, matching emotion labels to those facial cues.
Hmm.
And they also start to develop what's called emotion situation knowledge.
Okay, so explain that. What is emotion situation knowledge?
So that's, understanding what the typical emotional reactions are in different situations.
Right, so like if someone takes your toy away, you're probably going to feel angry
Right,
or
exactly.
upset.
So they start to kind of build this mental map of the emotional landscape
Hmm?
of different situations.
That makes sense.
And one interesting thing is that kids tend to learn the labels and the expressions for happiness, sadness, anger. Those come first
Okay.
before fear and surprise.
Interesting.
And that's been found, across different research methods, whether they're using pictures, puppets, asking kids about real life situations,
Hmm.
and even across different cultures, although, there's some evidence that kids might be a little bit better at interpreting expressions from their own ethnic group.
That makes sense. Yeah, familiarity.
Right.
Okay, so as kids get older, move into school age, adolescence, how does their understanding of emotion kind of continue to grow?
So, as they enter elementary school, their understanding becomes much more sophisticated.
Hmm.
They start to understand more complex emotions like shame, pride, guilt,
Hmm.
which, are very relevant in school.
Yeah, for sure.
They start to understand that you can experience multiple emotions at the same time.
Right, like you can be excited about a field trip, but also nervous about being away from home. For
Exactly.
listeners, that awareness of mixed emotions,
Hmm.
that's another sign of, a more complex understanding of their internal world.
Hmm. And they become less reliant on just looking at someone's face.
Right.
They start to take into account the context.
Okay.
They learn that sometimes you have to hide your feelings
Right.
to avoid negative consequences.
So that whole concept of having a poker face,
Right.
that
Yeah.
starts to develop.
Yeah. And around third grade, they develop what are called emotional display rules.
Okay.
So this understanding that you can control how you express an emotion, even if you're feeling something else on the inside.
Right. Like pretending to be happy even though you're disappointed.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they didn't get the part they wanted in the play.
Right. Exactly. So for listeners, this is really about kids developing that awareness of social norms
Mm-hmm.
and being able to manage their behavior to fit in.
Exactly. And by middle school, their understanding of basic emotions,
Mm.
it's pretty well established,
Okay.
but they continue to improve at, picking up on those subtle cues,
Mm-hmm.
understanding complex situations
Yeah.
throughout adolescence.
Okay.
But interestingly, research suggests that around age 30, we actually start to see a decline in some aspects of emotion understanding.
Oh, wow. Really? I would have thought it would just keep getting better.
Yeah, it's surprising, isn't it?
That's so interesting. I guess it shows that, even these skills that we think are, fully developed,
Mm-hmm.
they can still change over the lifespan.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about understanding emotions,
Mm-hmm.
but now let's talk about managing them,
Okay.
which is the other really key piece of this.
Right.
This is emotion regulation,
Yeah.
and that's about, what you actually do with those feelings once they come up. So for our listeners, this is really about turning that awareness
Yeah.
into action, into coping strategies.
Exactly. So emotion regulation is often defined as the ability to manage your emotional arousal.
Mm.
and control both how you feel internally and how you express those feelings.
Right.
And while it's important to regulate both positive and negative emotions,
Hmm.
there's often a greater need to manage the negative
Yeah,
ones.
because those are the ones that can be disruptive.
Right.
You don't really see kids getting in trouble for being too happy in the classroom.
Right, right. And researchers often distinguish between the types of strategies.
Okay.
There are antecedent-focused strategy.
So those are before the emotion even happens?
Yeah, like avoiding a situation, will upset you.
Right, right.
And then there are response-focused strategies.
Okay. Those are after the emotion is already there.
Right, like trying to calm yourself down when you're angry.
Hmm.
And emotion regulation, it involves, physiological processes, brain activity, your motivations, your behaviors.
Wow, that's a lot.
It's complex.
Yeah.
And also, we have to remember that some of our capacity for regulation is rooted in our biology,
Hmm.
our temperament.
So some kids might just be naturally more even-keeled than others.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's important for our listeners to keep in mind, right? Kids come to the classroom with different starting points
Absolutely. Yeah.
when it comes to managing their emotions.
Hmm.
Okay, so let's talk about early childhood.
Okay.
How does emotion regulation develop in those early years?
So right from birth, infants experience really intense emotions.
Right, both good and bad.
Exactly.
All right.
And learning how to handle those negative emotions early on is really crucial
Okay.
for their development later on, socially, emotional, even cognitively.
Right. Toddlerhood can be a really challenging time.
Yeah, those terrible twos.
Right, because that's when we see a lot of frustration and aggression.
Hmm.
And at first, very young kids, they really rely on their caregivers
Right, to soothe them.
to help them calm down.
Hmm.
But as they get a little older, they're expected to start using their own internal resources.
Right, to self-soothe.
Exactly.
Okay.
And by preschool, we start to see more planned strategies.
Oh, okay.
Like, they might try to vent their frustration verbally.
Mm.
They might try to resist a peer who's bothering them.
Right.
Or seek help from an adult.
Right, right. So it's a progression from needing help to doing it on their own.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and what about school age and adolescence? How does that development continue?
So in middle school, we typically see a shift toward more internal, more cognitive strategies. Instead of, physical reactions or seeking comfort,
Mm-hmm.
they start to use things like acceptance,
Okay.
just acknowledging the feeling.
Right. Cognitive distraction, shifting their focus,
Okay.
and positive reappraisal, trying to reframe the situation
Mhm.
in a more positive light.
Right, right. So those are more mature, more sophisticated strategies.
Exactly. And as they get into adolescence and early adulthood, the focus often shifts a bit
Okay.
away from just managing the emotion itself
Hmm.
and more toward achieving goals, gaining skills and experiences.
Right, so their priorities kind of change.
Yeah.
Okay, and one thing you mentioned earlier that I thought was really interesting was that, struggling with emotion regulation, that can actually predict problems in social relationships
Right.
throughout life.
It's true. The research is pretty consistent on that.
Wow, that's powerful. And some researchers even think that your ability to regulate your emotions, that's actually built on your understanding of those emotions.
Yeah. So you have to know what you're feeling before you can manage it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about understanding and regulating emotions,
Mm.
but now let's get to the heart of this deep dive, which is how these skills connect to school performance.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that, a lot of the early research focused more on social outcomes.
Right.
But what about academic outcomes? What have we learned there?
So, it's interesting. Even though emotional problems are a really common reason why kids are referred for support in schools, there hasn't been as much research specifically on that academic link.
Oh, that's surprising.
Yeah. But educational researchers have long suspected that being aware of your emotions, appraising them accurately, understanding them, that's all really critical for a positive classroom climate.
Okay, so a classroom where everyone is, more in tune with their emotions and better able to manage them,
Yeah.
that's just a better learning environment for everyone.
Right. Exactly.
So it's not just about social well-being.
Mm-hmm.
It actually impacts academics, too.
Yeah.
For our listeners, that's a really key takeaway.
Mm-hmm. And one area of research that's gotten a fair amount of attention is language competence.
Okay, so things like vocabulary, expression, understanding what others are saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there have been studies showing a positive link between preschoolers' emotion knowledge and their language skills.
Oh, okay.
Measured by standardized tests and things.
Right.
And basically, Kids who understand emotion labels
Hmm.
and who are aware of, situations that trigger different emotions,
Okay.
they tend to have better language skills overall.
Interesting. And this has been found in other countries as well.
Yeah, so research with European children
Hmm.
has found links between understanding emotions and various aspects of language development like vocabulary, narrative performance, sentence length, complexity,
Wow.
and even grammatical complexity has been linked to understanding emotion eliciting situations.
So the better you understand emotions, the better your grammar. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and even in first and second graders, there's a link between verbal abilities and understanding facial expressions and typical emotional situations.
Okay.
And this connection seems to continue into later elementary school.
Hmm.
Studies show emotion knowledge is related to vocabulary scores in kids, 9 to 12 years old.
Okay. So there's definitely a strong link there.
Yeah. And there's some debate about why this connection exists.
Hmm.
Some argue that it's just because, the tasks we use to assess emotion knowledge,
Right.
they often rely on verbal skills anyway.
Right. So it could just be a measurement issue.
Right.
Okay.
But others suggest that language itself is a tool for understanding emotions.
Hmm.
Being able to label your emotions, talk about them, that helps you make sense of them.
Right. So language helps you process those emotions.
Yeah, and that could then support, broader cognitive development, including language acquisition.
Interesting. Okay. What about attention? Yeah, that's another critical skill for learning.
Absolutely. And this is where that attentional control theory we talked about earlier comes in.
Hmm.
Research suggests that kids with higher emotion knowledge,
Okay.
they tend to have better focus and they
Hmm.
can sustain their attention longer.
Okay.
One study even found that a kid's emotion knowledge at the beginning of the year
Hmm.
predicted their attention skills later that year
Wow.
for early elementary students.
Interesting. So how did they measure that? How did they figure that out?
So they used a measure of emotion skills and teacher ratings of attention.
Oh.
And they also looked at peer nominations.
Oh, interesting.
And they found that kids who were nominated as happier
Okay.
were also rated as more attentive by their teachers.
Okay.
And kids who were nominated as more sad or angry, they were seen as less attentive.
Wow. So there's a real connection there between their emotional state and their ability to focus.
Yeah, exactly.
But, could it also be that kids who are just naturally good at focusing,
Hmm.
maybe they're also better at picking up on emotional cues?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's possible.
Right. It could go both ways.
It could be reciprocal, yeah.
Okay. So beyond those specific skills like language and attention,
Hmm.
what about just a child's overall adaptation to school?
Right.
How does emotion knowledge connect to that?
So by overall adaptation, we mean things like social skills, following rules, academic competence.
Right. Just their ability to kind of thrive in the school environment.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there have been some really important studies with preschoolers from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Okay.
And these studies have shown that their emotion knowledge early on predicted their social skills, their behavior problems, their academic competence later on.
Wow. So it had a long-lasting effect.
Yeah, even years later.
That's pretty powerful.
And these findings held even when they controlled for other factors like gender, language skills, temperament.
Okay. So it wasn't just about those other things.
Right.
It was really the emotion knowledge that was making the difference.
And similar findings have been found in Head Start programs.
Hmm.
There's a positive relationship between emotion knowledge and teacher ratings of adjustment and adaptation.
All right. So that's pretty consistent.
Yeah. But, it's worth mentioning that there have also been some studies that haven't found this link.
Okay. So it's not a guarantee.
Right. It's complex.
Right. It's complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What about intelligence and achievement test scores? Those are the things that people often focus on.
Yeah, for sure.
So what do we know about the link between emotion knowledge and those measures?
So there's some evidence of a link between emotion knowledge and IQ scores in preschoolers.
Okay.
Several studies have found this in normally developing kids, maltreated kids, kids at environmental risk.
Wow. So across a range of different groups.
Yeah. And one study even found that toddlers' IQ scores predicted their emotion knowledge later on.
Interesting.
But it's important to note that emotion knowledge doesn't seem to be linked to how young kids see their own academic ability.
Okay. So they might have good emotion knowledge, but not necessarily think of themselves as, smart or good at school.
Right. But it has been suggested that higher emotion knowledge might make kids more sensitive to teacher criticism.
Oh, that makes sense. If you understand emotions better, you might pick up on those cues more easily.
Exactly.
Okay.
And if we think back to those motivational theories,
Hmm.
these findings could suggest that emotion knowledge influences kids' interest and engagement
Right.
and how they react emotionally to things like tests and grades.
Mm-hmm.
Positive emotions can fuel that motivation,
Yeah.
but negative emotions can sometimes hinder it.
Right. Right. So it's a delicate balance.
Yeah. Although, as we talked about, some negative emotions, like a bit of anxiety,
Mhm.
can actually be motivating for some kids.
Right. Right. Okay. So when we look at older kids,
Mm-hmm.
there's less research on this direct link.
Right.
But one study found that kindergartners' emotion situation knowledge,
Okay.
combined with their IQ scores,
Mm-hmm.
actually predicted their third grade grades. Wow, so that early emotion knowledge was a predictor of later academic success.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
And another study found that the ability to express and understand affect was linked to achievement
Mm-hmm.
in African American children from low and middle income families. Okay, so again,
Yeah.
there's this consistent connection between emotions and academics.
Yeah, it seems to be a pretty robust finding.
Okay.
But, the link can look different depending on the age of the kids, the specific skills, their cultural background.
Right, it's not always the same across the board.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and what about children who are at higher risk for learning difficulties?
So research suggests that kids with ADHD or learning disabilities, they often have more trouble understanding emotions, especially anger.
Right.
And similarly, children with intellectual disabilities tend to have lower levels of emotion understanding.
Right.
And even kids with learning disabilities who have, average intelligence, they still might have trouble with things like emotion understanding and display rules.
Okay, so these skills are really important for all kids,
Yeah.
but they might be especially crucial for kids who are already facing other challenges.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. And we also have some evidence from effective intervention programs.
Right.
So remind our listeners, what are those programs?
So those are programs that are specifically designed to teach kids about emotions.
Right, and how to manage them.
Exactly.
Right.
And research has shown that when preschoolers participate in these programs, they show increases in emotion knowledge, regulation, social competence, and decreases in negative emotions.
Wow, so those programs are really effective.
They seem to be, yeah.
Yeah.
And similar programs for school-aged kids, they're linked to better cognitive performance,
Oh, wow.
improved classroom climate, fewer behavior problems.
So it's not just about, feeling good. It's also about doing well academically.
Right.
And these